Marcus Thompson stepped off the red double-decker bus at the gates of Buckingham Palace, with his phone already recording. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard as hundreds of tourists gathered around the famous landmark. Marcus had been planning this moment for weeks, ever since his buddies back in Denver had dared him to mess with the royal guards. He was 28 years old and worked as a software engineer, but today he felt like he was on top of the world. The American tourist pulled out his phone and started filming as he walked closer to the palace gates. He had read online that these guards were not allowed to move or speak no matter what happened. Some websites claimed that people had tried everything from telling jokes to making funny faces, and the guards just stood there like statues. Marcus thought this was the perfect opportunity to become famous on social media. He wore his favorite Denver Broncos jersey and carried a small backpack filled with snacks and souvenirs he had bought from the gift shop. His baseball cap was turned backwards, and he had that confident swagger that came from someone who had never really faced serious consequences for his actions. Marcus had always been the class clown in school and the office joker at work. He loved being the center of attention and making people laugh, even if it meant pushing boundaries. The crowd around him was typical for a Tuesday morning in London. Families with small children taking pictures, elderly couples reading guidebooks, and groups of teenagers on school trips. Most people kept a respectful distance from the guards, but Marcus had different plans. He noticed that one particular guard seemed to be getting more attention from photographers than the others. Standing perfectly still in his bright red tunic and tall black bearskin hat was Sergeant William Hayes. The guard had been on duty for exactly 2 hours and had 40 minutes left in his shift. His rifle was positioned precisely at his side, and his white gloves were spotless. His black boots shone like mirrors, and every button on his uniform was perfectly polished. To the tourists, he looked like a toy soldier or a character from a fairy tale. But William Hayes was far from a toy soldier. He had joined the British Army when he was 18 years old and had spent 15 years serving his country. He had been deployed to Afghanistan twice and had seen combat that most people could never imagine. His chest bore ribbons and medals that represented real battles and real courage. He had saved lives under enemy fire and had earned the respect of every soldier he had ever served with. Marcus did not know any of this as he approached the guard with his phone held high. He started speaking loudly so that other tourists would notice him. He made jokes about the guard's hat and uniform. He asked silly questions about whether the guard was hot or tired. Some tourists laughed and started taking pictures of Marcus instead of the guard. This only encouraged him to be more bold. The American tourist then decided to test the limits of what he could get away with. He stepped closer to the guard and started making funny faces directly in front of him. He waved his hands and did a little dance. The crowd was growing bigger and more people were filming. Marcus felt like he was putting on the performance of his lifetime. Sergeant Hayes remained completely motionless during all of this. His eyes stared straight ahead and his face showed no expression. Inside his mind, however, he was very aware of everything that was happening. He had been trained to ignore distractions and maintain his position no matter what. He had dealt with difficult tourists before and knew that most of them would get bored and move on if he just stayed still. But Marcus was not like most tourists. He was determined to get a reaction from the guard. He started telling the crowd that these guards were probably not even real soldiers. He claimed they were just actors hired to entertain tourists. He said that anyone could do their job because all they had to do was stand still and look pretty. The crowd was now getting uncomfortable with Marcus's behavior. Some people started to move away, while others whispered that he was being disrespectful. A few tourists tried to tell him to stop, but Marcus was too caught up in his moment of fame to listen. He was getting hundreds of likes and comments on his live stream and felt like he was about to become internet famous. Then Marcus made the decision that would change everything. He looked directly at Sergeant Hayes and issued a direct challenge. He said loudly so everyone could hear that he could beat any of these fake soldiers in a fair fight. He claimed that real soldiers were tough and these guards were just for show. He said he would prove that they were not real warriors by challenging one of them to a duel. The word duel echoed across the courtyard, and suddenly the atmosphere changed completely. The crowd went silent and everyone stared at Marcus with shock and disbelief. Even the other guards turned slightly to look in his direction. Marcus had crossed a line that no tourist had ever crossed before, and everyone knew that something big was about to happen. For a moment that seemed to last forever, nobody moved or spoke. The silence was so complete that people could hear the distant sound of London traffic and the clicking of camera shutters. Marcus stood there with his phone still recording and a confident smile on his face. He had no idea what he had just started, or who he was really dealing with. The other tourists looked at each other with worried expressions, and some parents pulled their children closer to them. Sergeant Hayes had been standing perfectly still during Marcus's entire performance, but something had changed in his mind. In all his years of service, as a royal guard, he had dealt with drunk tourists, rude visitors, and people who tried to make him laugh or move, but nobody had ever directly challenged him to a duel. Nobody had ever questioned his honor as a soldier in such a public and disrespectful way. The word duel meant something very different to William Hayes than it did to Marcus. In the military, duel was not just a word you threw around casually. It was about honor and respect and the willingness to defend your reputation. Hayes had served with soldiers who had died defending their honor and their country. He had seen friends give their lives for the uniform they wore and the flag they served under. Marcus continued talking to the crowd, completely unaware that he had just insulted a decorated war veteran. He started making jokes about how the guard was probably too scared to accept his challenge. He said that real soldiers would not just stand there and take insults. He claimed that if this guard was really tough, he would do something about it instead of just standing like a statue. The crowd was getting more and more uncomfortable with each word Marcus spoke. Some tourists started walking away because they could sense that something was wrong. Others stayed, but moved back to create more distance between themselves and the American tourist. A few people tried to tell Marcus to stop, but he was too excited by all the attention to listen to anyone. Then something happened that nobody expected. Sergeant Hayes slowly began to turn his head toward Marcus. The movement was so gradual that at first people thought they were imagining it, but inch by inch the guard's face turned until his steel gray eyes were looking directly at the American tourist. The crowd gasped, and several people stepped back in surprise. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat when he saw those eyes looking at him. They were not the eyes of a toy soldier or an actor, hired to entertain tourists. They were the eyes of someone who had seen real combat and real danger. They were the eyes of a man who had faced death and had not backed down. For the first time since he had started his performance, Marcus felt a tiny bit of fear.
Ow.
But the fear only lasted for a second because Marcus was too proud to admit that he might be wrong. He convinced himself that the guard was just trying to scare him and that he would not actually do anything. He told himself that these guards were still not allowed to break their rules, no matter what happened. He thought that looking at him was probably the most the guard could do. So Marcus decided to push even harder. He stepped closer to the guard until he was only a few feet away from him. He started talking directly to Sergeant Hayes, telling him that he was not impressed by the tough guy act. He said that if the guard was really a soldier, he would accept the challenge and prove himself. He told the guard that he was probably just a coward hiding behind a fancy uniform. The insult hung in the air like a dark cloud. Everyone in the crowd knew that Marcus had gone too far. Calling a soldier a coward was one of the worst things you could say to someone in the military. It was an attack on everything they stood for and everything they had worked for. Several people in the crowd shook their heads in disbelief at what they had just heard. Sergeant Hayes continued to stare at Marcus with those intense gray eyes. Behind his calm expression, his mind was working quickly. He was thinking about his options and what he should do next. He knew that he was supposed to ignore everything and maintain his position. He knew that breaking protocol could get him in serious trouble with his commanding officers. But he also knew that some things were more important than protocol. His honor as a soldier had been attacked in front of hundreds of people. His service to his country had been mocked and dismissed. Everything he had worked for and sacrificed for had been called fake and meaningless. He thought about his friends who had died in Afghanistan and what they would think if he just stood there and took this insult. The crowd watched in complete silence as the two men stared at each other. Marcus was still holding his phone and recording everything, but his confident smile was starting to fade. He was beginning to realize that this guard was different from what he had expected. The way the man was looking at him made him feel like he was being measured and judged by someone who knew things about courage and strength that Marcus had never learned. Then, in a voice that was quiet but carried clearly across the courtyard, Sergeant Hayes spoke his first words. He said simply and calmly, "Sir, I accept your challenge." The words hit the crowd like a thunderbolt, and everyone froze. In shock, Royal Guards were famous for never speaking while on duty. They were known for their ability to ignore any provocation and maintain their silence. But this guard had just broken one of the most important rules of his position. Marcus felt his mouth go dry as he heard those words. He had been expecting the guard to continue ignoring him, or at most to tell him to go away. He had never imagined that the guard would actually accept his challenge. Now he was trapped by his own big mouth, and his need to look tough in front of all these people. He could not back down now without looking like a complete fool, but he was starting to realize that he might have gotten himself into something much bigger than he could handle. The crowd erupted in whispers and gasps as words spread quickly. Through the gathering, people who had been walking by stopped to see what was happening. Tourists pulled out their phones and started recording. Some called their friends to come watch. Within minutes, the small group of onlookers had grown into a crowd of over 50 people, and more were arriving every second. Sergeant Hayes slowly stepped down from his position with movements that were precise and controlled. Every step he took was deliberate and purposeful, like a predator moving toward its prey. His boots clicked against the stone courtyard with a rhythm that sounded like a drumbeat. The crowd moved back to give him space, but nobody wanted to miss what was about to happen. Marcus watched the guard approach and felt his confidence starting to crumble. Up close, the man looked even more intimidating than he had from a distance. The guard was tall and broad-shouldered with muscles that were clearly visible even under his formal uniform. His face was weathered and serious with lines around his eyes that spoke of experience and hardship. This was not the soft ceremonial soldier that Marcus had expected. The guard stopped directly in front of Marcus and looked down at him with those piercing gray eyes. When he spoke, his voice was calm and measured, but there was something in it that made everyone listen carefully. He said, however, "Before we proceed, you should know exactly who you have challenged." I paused and let those words sink in before continuing. Marcus tried to maintain his cocky attitude, but his voice cracked slightly when he replied. He said that he did not care who the guard was, because he was just another fake soldier in a costume. He claimed that all the guards were just actors hired to look pretty for the tourists. He said that none of them were real fighters, and that he could beat any of them easily. Sergeant Hayes listened to this with no expression on his face. Then he began to speak in a voice that carried clearly across the courtyard. He said, "My name is Sergeant William Hayes of the Coldstream Guards. I have served in Her Majesty's Army for 15 years. I have completed 2 combat tours in Afghanistan, where I served as a squad leader in some of the most dangerous regions of that country." The crowd grew completely silent as they listened to the guard's words. Marcus felt his stomach drop as he realized that this was not going the way he had planned. The guard continued speaking, and with each word Marcus felt smaller and more foolish. The guard said, "I have been awarded the Military Cross for exceptional gallantry in the face of enemy fire. I have saved the lives of 6 fellow soldiers under combat conditions." Marcus tried to interrupt, but the guard raised one hand slightly and continued talking. He said, "I am a certified expert marksman with both rifle and pistol. I am a qualified instructor in hand-to-hand combat. I have led men in battle and brought them home safely. I have seen friends die defending the freedom that allows you to stand here today and insult the uniform I wear." Asterisk. The crowd was now completely captivated by what they were hearing. This was not just a guard in a fancy uniform. This was a genuine war hero who had earned every ribbon and medal on his chest through real sacrifice and real courage. People started taking pictures not of Marcus, but of Sergeant Hayes. They wanted to capture this moment when a true soldier was defending his honor. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face as he listened to the guard's military record. He had expected to embarrass some actor pretending to be a soldier, but instead he had challenged a decorated war veteran. He tried to think of something to say, but his mind was blank. All his cocky jokes and insults seemed stupid and childish now that he knew who he was really dealing with. The guard was not finished. He continued by saying, "I have been shot at by enemy snipers and have returned fire. I have called in airstrikes on enemy positions while under heavy fire. I have carried wounded soldiers to safety through minefields. I have earned the respect of every man I have ever served with through my actions, not my words." Someone in the crowd started to clap, and soon others joined in. The applause grew louder, and more people began cheering for Sergeant Hayes, were showing their appreciation for his service and their disapproval of Marcus's behavior. Marcus looked around at the crowd and saw expressions of admiration for the guard and disgust for himself. Sergeant Hayes raised his hand again, and the crowd fell silent. He looked directly at Marcus and said, "So when you challenge me to a duel, you are not challenging some actor in a costume. You are challenging a soldier who has proven himself in real combat against real enemies. You are challenging someone who has earned the right to wear this uniform through blood and sacrifice." Marcus felt like he was shrinking with every word. The guard spoke. He had never felt so embarrassed and foolish in his entire life. He wanted to run away, but there were too many people watching and recording. He was trapped by his own stupidity and his need to prove himself. He knew that anything he said now would only make him look worse. The guard stepped closer to Marcus and lowered his voice so that only Marcus could hear him clearly. He said, "I accept your challenge not because I want to fight you, but because you have insulted every soldier who has ever worn this uniform. You have disrespected men and women who have given their lives for their country. You have mocked the sacrifice of people who are better than you will ever be." Marcus felt tears starting to form in his eyes, but he fought them back. He could not cry in front of all these people. He had to maintain some dignity even though he knew he was completely outmatched. He mumbled something about not knowing that the guard was a real soldier, but his words sounded weak and pathetic even to himself. Sergeant Hayes straightened up and spoke to the crowd again. Said, "However, I believe in fighting fair and with honor. If we are going to settle this dispute, it will be done in a civilized manner that befits the uniform I wear and the country I serve. I propose that we compete in a series of challenges that will test knowledge, courage, and physical fitness, rather than engage in meaningless violence." The crowd cheered at this suggestion. They wanted to see Marcus get what he deserved. But they also respected the guard's desire to handle the situation with dignity and class. Marcus realized that he had no choice but to agree to whatever the guard proposed. He was trapped by his own big mouth and the dozens of cameras that were recording every moment of his humiliation. By now, the crowd had grown to over 100 people. Word was spreading quickly through social media, and more tourists were arriving every minute to see what was happening. Some people were live streaming the event, and comments were pouring in from viewers around the world. The hashtag Royal Guard Challenge was already trending on several social media platforms. Palace security had also taken notice of the situation. Several uniformed officers were positioned around the edges of the crowd, keeping watch but not interfering. They knew that Sergeant Hayes was a respected veteran who could handle himself in any situation. They also knew that stopping the event now would only make things worse for everyone involved. Sergeant Hayes looked around at the crowd and then back at Marcus. He said, "The first challenge will be a test of military knowledge and British history. Since you claim to know so much about what makes a real soldier, let us see how much you actually know about military service and the country whose guards you have insulted." Marcus felt his heart sink even further. He knew almost nothing about British history or military matters. He had barely paid attention in his high school history classes and had never shown any interest in learning about other countries. He was completely unprepared for this kind of challenge, but he had no choice but to accept it. The guard continued by saying, "I will ask you 10 questions about British military history and traditions. For every question you answer correctly, I will remove one piece of my ceremonial equipment. For every question you answer incorrectly, you will have to publicly apologize for one of the insults you have made today." The crowd murmured their approval. At this arrangement, it seemed fair, and it would give Marcus a chance to redeem himself if he actually knew anything about the subjects he had been mocking. Marcus nodded his agreement, though his stomach was churning with anxiety. He knew he was about to be embarrassed even more than he already had been. Sergeant Hayes stood at attention and asked his first question. said, "What is the name of the elite regiment that guards Buckingham Palace, and what year was it formed?" The question seemed simple enough, but Marcus had no idea what the answer was. He had never bothered to learn anything about the guards he had been mocking. Marcus looked around at the crowd, hoping someone would give him a hint, but everyone was staring at him expectantly. He tried to guess and said the Royal Palace. Guards formed in 1800. The crowd groaned and several people shook their heads. Sergeant Hayes said calmly, "The correct answer is the Coldstream Guards formed in 1650. Please apologize for calling us fake soldiers." Marcus felt his face turn red with embarrassment. He had to stand in front of all these people and admit he was wrong. He mumbled an apology, but Sergeant Hayes asked him to speak louder so everyone could hear. Marcus repeated his apology in a stronger voice, feeling more foolish with each word. The second question was about the Battle of Waterloo and when it was fought. Marcus had heard of the battle but had no idea when it happened. He guessed 1820, but the correct answer was 1815. He had to apologize for saying the guards were not real fighters. The third question was about Winston Churchill and his military service. Marcus knew Churchill was a famous leader, but knew nothing about his early military career. Question after question, Marcus failed to answer correctly. We did not know. About the charge of the Light Brigade, or the Battle of Britain, or the founding of the SAS. He could not name a single Victoria Cross recipient or explain the difference between the various guard regiments. With each wrong answer, he had to make another public apology. The crowd was watching in fascination as Marcus was systematically humiliated by his own ignorance. People were sharing videos of his failed answers and posting comments about how he had brought this embarrassment on himself. Some viewers were actually feeling sorry for him by this point, but most were enjoying seeing him get what he deserved. After Marcus had failed all 10 questions, Sergeant Hayes said, "Now we will test your physical fitness, since you claimed you could beat any of us in a fair fight. We will have a simple competition to see who is in better shape." The crowd cheered and pressed closer to get a better view of what was about to happen. Marcus was already exhausted from the stress and embarrassment of the previous challenge, but he knew he had to continue. He had always considered himself to be in decent shape since he went to the gym occasionally and played basketball with friends. He thought maybe he could redeem himself in this physical competition. Sergeant Hayes removed his ceremonial jacket and handed it to another guard who had come over to watch. Underneath, he wore a crisp white shirt that showed off his muscular arms and chest. Even at 43 years old, he was clearly in exceptional physical condition. His body was lean and strong, like a professional athlete. The guard said, "We will start with push-ups, standard military form with full range of motion. We will do as many as we can without stopping." Marcus agreed, and they both got into position on the ground. The crowd formed a circle around them, and someone volunteered to count the repetitions. They started doing push-ups together, and at first Marcus was able to keep up. He managed to do 20, then 30, then 40 repetitions. He was feeling confident that maybe he could actually compete with the guard in this challenge, but as they continued, Marcus started to slow down, and his form became sloppy. Sergeant Hayes continued doing perfect push-ups with steady rhythm and controlled breathing. His form never changed, and he showed no signs of fatigue. Marcus was struggling by the time they reached 60 repetitions. His arms were shaking, and he was breathing heavily. The guard looked like he was just getting warmed up. 70 push-ups, Marcus collapsed to the ground, unable to continue. His arms felt like rubber, and his chest was burning. He rolled over onto his back, gasping for air, while the crowd counted as Sergeant Hayes continued. The guard kept going until he reached 100 perfect push-ups, then stood up without even breathing hard. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers for the guard's incredible display of fitness. Marcus lay on the ground feeling defeated and humiliated. He had been completely outclassed in every way possible. He realized that he had challenged someone who was superior to him in every area that mattered. Sergeant Hayes stood over Marcus and extended his hand to help him up. Despite everything that had happened, the guard's gesture was respectful and professional. Marcus took the offered hand and struggled to his feet, still breathing heavily from the physical exertion. His legs were shaky, and his shirt was soaked with sweat. The guard said quietly, so only Marcus could hear, I hope you are beginning to understand what it means to serve your country and wear this uniform.
Oh,
This is not about showing off or proving who is stronger. This is about dedication, discipline, and sacrifice that most people cannot imagine. Marcus nodded weakly, unable to find words to respond. But Sergeant Hayes was not finished with the demonstration. He said to the crowd, "Now I will show you some of the ceremonial drill movements that we perform as part of our duties. These movements require years of practice and perfect precision. They are a symbol of the discipline and attention to detail that defines a professional soldier." The guard retrieved his rifle from where it had been secured and began to perform a series of complex drill movements. He spun the rifle with incredible speed and precision, catching it perfectly each time. He marched in perfect formation, changing direction with sharp, precise movements that looked like a choreographed dance. The crowd watched in amazement as the guard demonstrated the skills that tourists usually only saw from a distance. Every movement was flawless, and every step was perfectly timed. His boots clicked against the stone in perfect rhythm, and his posture never wavered even for a second. It was clear that these movements had been practiced thousands of times until they became second nature. Marcus watched with growing respect and shame as he saw the incredible skill and dedication that went into being a royal guard. I thought these men were just standing around looking pretty. But now he could see the years of training and discipline that their job required. Every aspect of their performance demanded perfection. Sergeant Hayes finished his drill demonstration and returned to attention position. The crowd burst into spontaneous applause that lasted for several minutes. People were cheering and taking pictures and videos of the impressive display they had just witnessed. Many tourists were sharing the videos on their social media accounts with captions praising the guard's skill. The guard then said, "For my final demonstration, I will show you what real military bearing looks like under pressure." He asked several people from the crowd to try to distract him while he maintained his ceremonial position. People started making loud noises, waving their hands, and even telling jokes, but the guard remained perfectly still. Children from the crowd were invited to try to make the guard smile or move. They made funny faces and told silly stories, but Sergeant Hayes maintained his professional composure throughout it all. His eyes remained fixed straight ahead, and his expression never changed even when a small child tugged gently on his uniform. Marcus realized that this was what he had been trying to do earlier, but now he understood the incredible self-control and discipline it required. The guard was not ignoring the distractions because he was not paying attention. He was ignoring them because he had trained himself to maintain focus and professionalism no matter what was happening around him. After the demonstration was complete, Sergeant Hayes turned to Marcus and said, "Now you have seen what it really means to be a royal guard. You have seen the knowledge, the physical fitness, the skill, and the discipline that this job requires. Do you still think we are just actors in costumes playing dress-up for tourists?" Marcus shook his head, and for the first time since the whole encounter began, he spoke with genuine humility in his voice. Said, "No, sir, I was completely wrong about everything. I had no idea what you and the other guards really do, or what you have sacrificed for your country. I am truly sorry for insulting you and disrespecting your service." The crowd fell silent as they listened to Marcus's apology. Many people had their phones out recording this moment when the arrogant tourist finally admitted he was wrong.
oh,
People in the crowd were actually moved by the sincerity in Marcus's voice and the genuine regret he was showing. Sergeant Hayes looked at Marcus for a long moment before responding. Said, "Apology accepted. But I want you to understand that when you insult one of us, you insult all of us. When you mock our service, you mock every soldier who has ever worn a uniform. Your words have consequences, and those consequences extend far beyond just one person." Marcus nodded and said, "I understand that now. I came here thinking I was just going to have some fun and maybe get some likes on social media. I never thought about the real people behind the uniforms or what they have done to earn the right to wear them. I was selfish and ignorant, and I am ashamed of my behavior." The guard's expression softened slightly as he heard the genuine remorse in Marcus's voice. He said, "The best apology you can make is to learn from this experience and treat others with respect in the future. Remember? that every person you meet has a story and has earned their place in the world through their own efforts and sacrifices. Marcus asked if there was anything he could do to make up for his behavior. Sergeant Hayes thought for a moment and then said, "You can share the real story of what happened here today. Tell people about the training and dedication that goes into being a Royal Guard. Help them understand that we are not just tourist attractions, but real soldiers with real experience." The crowd began to disperse as the confrontation came to its conclusion. Many people stopped to shake hands with Sergeant Hayes and thank him for the incredible demonstration they had witnessed. Some tourists asked for pictures with the guard, and he politely agreed to a few photos while maintaining his professional demeanor. Marcus stood off to the side watching as people showed their respect and admiration for the guard. He felt a mixture of shame for his earlier behavior and genuine admiration for the man who had taught him such an important lesson. He realized that this experience had changed him in ways he was only beginning to understand. Other guards had been watching the entire encounter, and they approached Sergeant Hayes to congratulate him on how he had handled the difficult situation. They were proud of how he had defended their honor while maintaining the dignity and professionalism that their position required. He had turned a potentially embarrassing incident into a teaching moment that honored their service. As the crowd continued to thin out, Marcus approached Sergeant Hayes one final time. He extended his hand for a handshake and said, "Thank you for teaching me something important today. I will never forget this lesson, and I promise to be more respectful in the future." The guard shook his hand firmly and nodded with approval at the young man's changed attitude. Within hours, the videos of the encounter had spread across the internet like wildfire. The hashtag Royal Guard Challenge was trending worldwide on every major social media platform. News outlets from around the globe were picking up the story and running segments about the American tourist who challenged a decorated war veteran to a duel. Marcus found himself at the center of international attention, but not in the way he had hoped. Comments on the videos ranged from people calling him an idiot to others praising his eventual humility and willingness to apologize. The majority of viewers were impressed by Sergeant Hayes and his professional handling of the situation. News reporters began reaching out to Marcus for interviews about what had happened. At first, he was reluctant to talk to the media because he was embarrassed about his behavior. But then he remembered what Sergeant Hayes had told him about sharing the real story and helping people understand what Royal Guards really do. Marcus decided to give interviews to several major news networks. In each interview, he was honest about his mistakes and spoke with genuine respect about Sergeant Hayes and the other Royal Guards. He explained how ignorant he had been about military service and how the encounter completely changed his perspective on respect and honor. During one television interview, Marcus said, "I thought I was being funny and clever, but I was actually being cruel and disrespectful to a man who had risked his life for his country. Sergeant Hayes could have humiliated me completely, but instead, he chose to educate me, showed incredible class and professionalism throughout the entire encounter." The interviewer asked Marcus what he had learned from the experience. Marcus replied, "I learned that you should never judge people based on appearances or assumptions. I learned that real strength comes from discipline and service to others, not from showing off or trying to prove how tough you are. Most importantly, I learned that respect has to be earned, and these guards have earned it many times over." Meanwhile, Sergeant Hayes was also being contacted by media outlets wanting to interview him about the incident. His commanding officers had reviewed the videos and determined that while he had broken protocol by engaging with the tourist, his actions had ultimately brought positive attention to the Royal Guards and the British military. In his interviews, Sergeant Hayes spoke about the importance of military service and the dedication required to be a Royal Guard. He explained that their job was not just ceremonial, but required extensive training and unwavering discipline. Used the incident as an opportunity to educate the public about what the Guards really do and why their role is important. The sergeant said, "We are not just tourist attractions or museum pieces. We are active duty soldiers who take our responsibilities very seriously. Our ceremonial duties are just one part of our service, but they require the same level of excellence and dedication as any other military assignment." Educational institutions began using the videos as teaching tools about respect, cultural sensitivity, and the importance of understanding before judging. Military academies showed the footage to cadets as an example of how to handle difficult situations with professionalism and dignity. Tourism officials in London reported an increase in visitors to Buckingham Palace in the weeks following the incident. Many tourists said they came specifically because they wanted to see the royal guards and show their respect. After learning about their real qualifications and service records, Marcus returned to Denver a changed person. He kept his promise to Sergeant Hayes by continuing to share the story and educate others about the importance of respecting military service. He started a blog where he wrote about his experience and the lessons he had learned about humility and honor.
Back at work, Marcus found that his co-workers had all seen the videos of his encounter with the Royal Guard. Some of them teased him about it. Marcus took the ribbing in good spirit.
He used it as an opportunity to talk about what he had learned and to encourage others to think before they acted in similar situations. Marcus also started volunteering with local veterans organizations in Denver. He said that meeting Sergeant Hayes had made him realize how little he knew about military service and sacrifice. He wanted to learn more and find ways to support the men and women who had served their country. The story continued to inspire people months later. Veterans groups shared the videos as examples of military professionalism and dedication. Parents used the story to teach their children about respect and the consequences of disrespectful behavior. Sergeant Hayes returned to his normal duties, but found that tourists now approached him and the other guards with much more respect than before. Many visitors thanked him for his service and expressed genuine appreciation for the work that he and his fellow guards do. A year later, Marcus made a return trip to London, specifically to visit Buckingham Palace again. This time he approached the guards with proper respect and admiration. He was hoping to see Sergeant Hayes again and thank him once more for the life-changing lesson he had received. When Marcus arrived at the palace, he was delighted to see that Sergeant Hayes was on duty that day. The guard recognized him immediately and gave him a small nod of acknowledgement. Marcus stood at a respectful distance and simply watched as the guard performed his duties with the same precision and a dedication that had impressed him so much before. After his shift ended, Sergeant Hayes approached Marcus, and they had a brief conversation. Marcus told the guard about all the positive changes in his life that had resulted from their encounter. He thanked the sergeant for handling the situation with such grace and for teaching him lessons that no school or book could have provided. Sergeant Hayes told Marcus that he was proud of how the young man had grown from the experience. He said that turning a moment of foolishness into a lifetime of learning and service was exactly the kind of transformation that made his job worthwhile. The encounter between Marcus Thompson and Sergeant William Hayes became one of the most famous incidents in Royal Guard history. It showed the world that these ceremonial soldiers are far more than tourist attractions. They are dedicated professionals who embody the highest values of military service. The story also demonstrated that even the most embarrassing mistakes can become opportunities for growth and learning. Marcus's willingness to admit his errors and change his behavior inspired countless others to examine their own attitudes about respect and service. Today, the videos of the encounter continue to be shared and discussed around the world. They serve as a reminder that real strength comes not from trying to tear others down, but from building yourself up through discipline, dedication, and service to something greater than yourself. The legendary reaction of the Royal Guard had indeed changed not just one tourist, but thousands of people who witnessed the power of responding to disrespect with dignity and education rather than anger.